Good morning, everybody. Like Allison said, thank you for introducing me, Allison. My name is David Lewis. I'm with Brightview Tree Care Services here in Richmond, Virginia. Um, and I'm excited to be here today and talk about scale and scale management and the hidden enhancement. This is more about my profile. I've been in the industry for 20 years, like Allison said. I started off as a climber for probably, I forget, I was a freelance climber for about 16 years. And then I came to Brightview as a climber and then moved into a management position. The tree service here in the SOVA market has grown over the last 3 years. It's probably grown 30% each year. And the plant healthcare part of the tree service has grown about at the same rate, as about 30% per year. I'm track certified and CTSP. So here's what I'll be talking about today. The objectives is what are scale insects, the impact of in the landscape, common scale insects in commercial landscape, treatment protocols, and next steps. Here's some fun. So what are scale insects? Scale insects belong to a large group of sucking type of insects that attack a wide variety of trees and shrubs. Some scales are host specific and other scales will feed off of multiple different plant material, trees, and so forth. Most scales, soft and hard, their eggs are laid under the female dies and she covers herself or lays a layer over the eggs, and the adult they're covered and then until they hatch. Go down here through here. So that's some more pictures of some scale. What's their impact on the landscape? The impact on the plants. The aesthetic appeal, honeydew, decreases the photosynthetic activity, transmission of viruses, economical loss, and reduces plants' vitality. But they also have a lot of benefits too. Shellac is made out of scale, and scale attracts a lot of beneficials. So when we are treating for scale, which I'll get into that later on, we want to make sure that our treatments are done in a targeted and controlled environment. Well, here's a picture of this is a row of red maples. As you can see, this one red maple is significantly doesn't look like the rest of the red maples. And here's the reason why: it's got gloomy scale. The scales, it's highly infested with gloomy scale. It starts out at the very tips of the branches. So if you're noticing it on the trunk of the tree in a union or all the way down the trunk, you have a highly infested tree with gloomy scale. And gloomy scale can be very tough to get rid of. I'll add in here right here that, from my standpoint is that sometimes when I deal with gloomy scale and crepe myrtle bark scale a lot here in the Virginia Beach area and Richmond. And, we can treat the symptoms, but we also have to look at what is causing the stressors. Usually with red maples, their roots are shallow, so they will girdle the tree. So, after we get the scale under control, then we need to start addressing the problem that's causing the stress. Here's another picture of a crepe myrtle. And, you could tell by the blackness of the bark that it's got sooty mold going on there. And there's the picture of the actual scale itself. And let me go back, sorry. And so here, this crepe myrtle here is completely infested with crepe myrtle bark scale, which is seeming to show up a lot more here in my area, especially in the Virginia Beach area. I see it all the time. I see it constantly, but it's starting to move. It seems like it's starting to affect more of the crepe myrtles here in the Richmond area. So here's a picture of a crepe myrtle. I think, to be honest with you, the picture is upside down, But anyways, it's got sooty mold on there, and it's being attacked by aphids. And so here's the actual crepe myrtle, and here's what it's doing to the car. This crepe myrtle, it's a funny. I can tell you a funny story. It's not funny, but so last year I was called out to a property in Hampton, and they had a terrible infestation of ants inside the apartment and the apartment complex in this one corridor. So when I approached the property, I noticed that there was 14 crepe myrtles inside there, and they were dripping with honeydew, which attracts the ants, and the ants had infested the whole entire apartment complex. That all of them apartments surrounding that area. So we went in there and we treated for them, and eventually got control on the bark scale. Here's the four main scales that you'll be dealing with. Is it soft and armored scales, and then you got felt scale, millibugs, and giant scale. The two that I see the most that I deal with are the top three: is soft, armored, and felt scale. You see them quite regularly. Millibugs too. I mean, I guess pretty much all, you could say all of them, but the three I see the most are the top three. So soft scales. Soft scales are you got two categories. You got soft scales and hard scales. Soft scales, they produce honeydew, which causes sooty mold, which attracts ants and all kinds of other stuff. But they also attract beneficials. So that's why I said there in the beginning is that we need to make sure that we're using controlled sprays and targeted sprays, and not just going around and spraying everything that we see with pesticides. There's also other ways to deal with scale. You can deal with it with beneficials, and addressing, like I stated before, is what's causing the stressor for the plant to be under attack. A lot of times I've found that it's been nutrients deficiency. It could be water. So you could add like a product like biochar to the soil. It could be mulch, too much mulch that's up on the root flare, and it needs a light root collar excavation, cutting off your advantageous roots. And it shows you right here that how many eggs they produce a year is amazing. They just rapidly keep producing. It's really amazing how fast this soft scale will multiply if not addressed. And here's a cross section of a leaf, and you got your xylem and your phloem over here, and that's called the vascular bundle. Excuse me. And so what happens is, along comes your scale or your aphid, and it'll interject its tongue right through the vascular bundle, and that will damage the cell, and then it withdraws large quantities of water. And then you'll start seeing a lot of dieback and so forth. You'll start seeing signs of sooty mold or honeydew dripping. If you're dealing with soft scales, hard scales, they're more stationary. And here's your waste from the actual honeydew, and then which brings on black sooty mold. Now, once I've gotten trees like crepe myrtles under control, I have the sooty mold is it's unsightly. So you can also take and use like a soft brush and take a soap, like a non-abrasive soap, and wipe that black sooty mold off once you've gotten good control. Here's the hard scale. It's got a waxy shell. It does not produce honeydew. And it's more, I would say for me, out of the two soft and hard scales, the hard scale is I've definitely had more challenges with treating it and, getting it under control. And here's the management for plant healthcare. The first, excuse me, setting action thresholds, monitoring, diagnosing, and preventing. If you're planning on starting an IPM program, you're going to have to be monitoring your landscape for, and knowing the time of emergements. Rainbow is very good about, I've worked with Rainbow now for 4 years, and they're really good about supplying you with like emergent sheets for whatever area you're in. And they have special technicians in them areas that know when the emergent times, because the emergent times are very important for treatments. If you don't catch them at the right time, and it's only a certain amount of time you can catch them, the crawlers when they come out, if you miss that threshold, treatment is at that time it's not possible. Here's some more information about different states and different types of scales from New Jersey. This one actually is from New Jersey, and it just tells you, basically your scale insects and the degrees of days of how many babies they produce. This is the next step. So it's very vital for us to know what type of plant we're treating or trees that we're treating. So we need to properly ID the tree or plant before we even think about any type of treatment or, anything. You need to ID, make sure that you have the right plant or tree. So this slide here is more talking about, determining the cost and the price. And I'll talk a few minutes here about this so it's very important to know the count of trees and the average. I use the average DBH for trees or the square footage of the plant materials, the plants that you plan on treating for your proposal to be able to come up with the correct numbers. What I usually do is I usually pick out 1, 2, or 3 trees on the property and measure them, and then come up with a common number, and then just count the trees and then add the DBH. So if you say you have 10 10-inch trees, then that would be a total of 100 DBH for this to treat this property. You would need enough chemicals to treat 100 DBH. And this is the proposal, the verbiage. I don't know why it changed like that on me, but it just says right here that that gloomy scale is X number of trees were recently identified with known as gloomy scale. Gloomy scale is a pest of maples. It just explains to the customer what you have found and the cost per tree and the total cost. And the same thing for Crepe Myrtle bark scale is how many trees and their total cost that the trees will cost per tree and the total cost. Here's a case study done. It's a gated high-end community that had lichen scale infestation. And so they created a 3-year management program with 100 trees per year. The average DBH was 10 inches and $40 per tree, or $4,000 per year. The breakout is about $1,500 in product costs, $600 in labor, and it's a $1,900 difference. For us, plant healthcare is something that I'm still kind of new at, learning. I'm still learning. I mean, we'll always be learning, but for me, seeing the results after I walk onto a property and, that's infested with some type of scale, and we've got it under control, and seeing the difference and the end product is is just always amazing and satisfying to me. It's what makes me get up in the morning and actually, you know, work and try to, do the very best I can. Um, man, that is pretty much, pretty much what I had to say. I want to talk about a couple other little cue points here. Like I said before, and I just want to make sure that I implement this, is that when we're treating for any type of scales, we have to make sure that it's targeted and controlled. We don't want to kill all the beneficials that are else on there. You can, if you have a really bad infestation with scale, once you get it under control, or you can use a scale growth regulator, which doesn't attack the beneficials. It doesn't kill the beneficials, because the beneficials are, they're beneficial. So, that's basically all I have right there. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. And I'm going to kick it back over to Allison.
Cool. Thanks, David. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more. I'm going to take this over and talk a little bit more about some of our management stuff. And then we actually do have a few questions coming in, and I have a couple other questions of my own. But before I get started, Matt wants to know if you could go back to your last slide while we've got you to talk about the $1,900 difference. Is that just that was the profit?
Yes.
Cool. So
Yes.
Matt, yeah, that's great. I mean, and that's a huge profit margin on something like that. So if
It,
you've got a $4,000 a year program,
right.
right?
And you could, Matt, just so you know, these 100 trees would probably take a guy. It looks to me like they're doing bark sprays. It would probably take one guy to treat these trees, maybe 7-8 hours, if at the longest. So it's very profitable. But I don't really like to talk about the profit part. It is nice, my believe me, the people that are higher up than me like plant healthcare, because it does turn high profits, and I just get to satisfied about it helping the tree. But yeah, so in this case study here, this treatment, this 3-year plan, they'll send a guy out there one time for 6 hours, and you're going to bill $4,000 and spend $1,500 in product. The $600 labor rates fluctuate from, state to state. So it could be different. And a lot of times with these, some of these projects like this here, that would be something that I find enjoyment in, and I would go out and do personally, rather than, send one of my plant technicians out there.
Cool. All right, I'm gonna grab this from you, and then we'll go over a few things, and then we have some more questions as it kind of relates back to what you were just talking about. So, uh, do 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 do. I'm going to talk about really quick. So David just gave us kind of like high level things about scales, some of the issues that he's seen. And I really want to dig in. We have plenty of time. So I want to dig into more questions for you, how you're pricing things. That profit thing, I know we don't want to talk about, it's taboo, but that is who we have here. And those are the questions that we want from you, right? Like, so if you've been here with us, we've been talking about scale with all of our researchers and the PhDs and the super smarty people. They are great. They have so much knowledge and information, but people like David, who are growing plant healthcare programs for their businesses, are really the people who we want to like learn about actually being in the field and having practical information from. So David, we really appreciate this side of things, and I want to dig into that a little bit more with you.
Okay.
So I know you sort of talked about this, and I'm going to ask you a little bit more about your programs as well, but I just want to highlight really quickly that we do have kind of a toolbox variety open to you. So we do have those foliar sprays that David was talking about, and bark sprays as well. There are opportunities for tree injection as well as soil application, depending on your sites. So as arborists, as landscape managers, we're always looking out there. We're going to recognize that there are different things, different sites, and you're going to have to use something different potentially depending on what you've got. And generalized life cycle of the scales. David talked about this a little bit, but basically, so it's not the same for all of them, but basically they begin as eggs, they have the instars, that crawler stage, they grow through 3 instar stages, and then they become adults. And the main highlighting point of this is, as you already said, we want to make sure that we are highlighting that first instar crawler, because that is when that pest is the most susceptible and you're going to have the best capacity to get control of the pest. So you talked about soft skills, you talked about hard skills. And for those of you who are from the Rocky Mountain territories, please note that these are where the questions are coming from. So we apologize. This is just, we had to send in the questions many weeks ago and we weren't sure who is going to be presenting who is going to be presenting what information. So listen up if you're taking the quiz. Soft skills, they are phloem feeders and they produce honeydew. We already talked about this, right? Those are the calls that you're getting when you have a big sooty mold problem and a big honeydew problem. Soft skills. We have quite a few different things that we can use in our toolbox. David just talked about insect growth regulators as an option for a foliar application for the crawler stage, and that would be Proxite. That's pyriproxyfen. So that is our insect growth regulator. You would want to spray that at the time of crawler emergence. So for each pest, that's slightly different. Holler at us if you have any questions about growing degree days or emergences of different scales, because they are slightly different, as we know. Then we've also got a couple options for dinotefuran. Those are Transtech. So that can be done as a bark spray or soil application. And then we also have a Transtech infusible. So that's an injectable version. So say you have just a really important tree that is right by a pond and you can't spray it, that's a good option. And I know David has some anecdotal discussion about ponds that I'm going to get into with him later too. And then we also have Zytec. So that's our imidacloprid. That gives you a full season of control. That's done as a soil application. There is also an injectable version of that. Just high note, those 2 products are neonics. They, there's a lot of pushback on those in some areas of the country. However, when used and timed properly, they have their time and place. When you've got really bad infestations that you need to get control of, having a little bit more of a kitchen sink option, doing a few applications in a year to get control, knock it back, and then you can really focus on ecological integrity once the population is managed. Because if you're between removing, like we just saw a case study, 100 maples, you're between removing 100 maples or using some pesticides to make sure that they're, knocking back that population for 1 year, keeping them all alive, the ecosystem services, the benefits, the cost to remove and replace trees, that these are things that you certainly need to consider. Like there are ecological downsides for that as well. And then of course we have horticultural oil. That's really nice for the dormant season. Highlight really quickly, you will see Zytec on here. Imidacloprid works on soft scales, and that's partially because they are phloem feeders. So when the Zytec is moving through that phloem and the pest sucks it up, it can kill them. Because armored scales do not feed in the same manner, they feed on the plant material, the plant cells, it does not work. So Zytec, imidacloprid only works on soft scales. You may see some anecdotal evidence that it works a little bit on hard scales, but not statistically speaking, right? So if we look at the actual data from the researchers out there. Armored scale management, this looks very similar, but you'll notice again that the imidacloprid, the Zytec, is not on here. Same thing though, Proxite timed with the crawlers, Transtech, again, also timed with the crawlers. And I guess this is important, I didn't highlight this. Transtech gets taken up relatively quickly into a tree, so it builds within about 30 days, can get taken up, versus Zytec takes like 90 to 120 days to build up. So when you're thinking about timing and you're thinking about your labor and your crews, what makes the most sense? Like, so are they super, super busy in the beginning of the season doing pre-emergence, irrigation, enhancements, whatever? Maybe your imidacloprid is not your answer for a soft scale because your crews are just so busy you don't even have the labor to do it. Versus Transtech, say you have like a magnolia scale or something that's a little bit later in the season, they've got a lull, then that could also be part of your toolbox to consider based on what your crew availability is. And then again, we have RTSA, horticultural oil, and then you also want to mix 0.5% of horticultural oil with your peroxide if you use that. And that's kind of used as a surfactant, a spreader sticker sort of situation. I also want to highlight, we've got scales everywhere. So right now we're hearing from the Virginia area, but I'm out on the West Coast. We have tons of scales here too. Whenever we poll our people, the number one issue is one of the top 5 issues in every region of the country is undoubtedly a scale of some sort. So this is why we've sort of had this big focus on these scales. We created this scale insect management guide. And Peter, if you wouldn't mind popping that in the chat, that link in the chat, this is available for all of you. Really good information there. Talks about some of the stuff that we're talking about here right now, but it's just like a really nice reference and is beautiful. So thank you to our marketing team who made it look really nice and really easy to use. That's a great reference point. And then David also mentioned that we do have emergence kind of like timetables and other documents and things like that. So if you need any help from us with those sort of product guides or scale guides or specific pest guides, please let us know, because there is our tech support line right there. You can call us, text us, or email us if you ever have any identification issues, mixing questions, what chemicals to use, you know, walking through any sort of issues that you may run into out in the field. We are available to you during regular business hours, Monday through Friday. And with that, that's all I have, but I have quite a few questions for you, David. So we're gonna take this second half and turn this into a little more of like Q&A sort of situation, if that's okay.
You there?
Cool, I am here. So Peter just typed in the scale management guide. And then we've got one question coming through, and then I'm gonna come to mine. So Catherine Odell wants to know, oh, can you use traditional spreader sticker with peroxide, or is Hort Oil better? You can use traditional spreader sticker. I don't see any issue with that. We just recommend the Hort Oil. I think there was an efficacy study done that it just got a little bit better capacity to penetrate through the leaves. But if you've got regular spreader sticker, feel free to use that. It should all be fine. And I can send more data if we have that on hand. Okay, so David, what I have for you is a question around, because you deal with both homeowner situations like a traditional arborist as well as landscape properties, right?
Yes.
Okay, so how do you factor in like pricing, and what are the differentiators for you there? Because as a commercial residential arborist, like for me, it would just be flat cost for this. Like I wasn't dealing with enhancement costs or anything like that. So if you want to just explain that a little bit.
Well, so traditionally, I came from the residential market, doing, just tree removals. But then once I stepped over into the commercial landscaping and started going back and doing some residential stuff, what I learned is I have a little story. The lady that I had on a program for 3 years, for her, she's got an assortment of different ornamental trees on her property. They get leaf spot every year. So we've done some, soil applications and stuff like that to try to help out with the leaf spot. But needless to say is that I didn't really pay attention that she had koi fish ponds all around the trees. So I didn't take into consideration that when my guys go out there to do the actual spraying, which will be, a foliar spray, that we're going to have to cover up the koi fish ponds. And so I didn't put that into my timing of my proposal. And, we're going to honor what we said we're going to do, but that job ended up for the last 3 years performing lower than what I would like. So, for me is when on a commercial or residential property, you need to look at your surroundings and what type of clients you're dealing with. Are they going to be difficult? Are they going to be easy to work with? That's one thing that I look at. And then the second thing is what's surrounding in the landscape, near what you're going to be treating. Is there school buses? Is there a school bus stop right in front of their house? Then you can't spray. These types of things will affect your proposal, because that price should be reflected in it, or make sure that that for your tech not to show up until after the school bus is gone, or if they have koi fish ponds and you're going to need plywood or mats or something to cover up the fish so they don't get sick from the product.
Yeah, and I think probably every arborist on this call has lost, or landscape manager has lost their shirts on some sort of job because of just that. And then I do want to kind of piggyback off that, and this is, just an important note. I know you guys do offer a lot of spray services, and especially as you just said with the koi fish pond, it was a fun fungus issue, a leaf fungus issue. Right now for leaf funguses, we really don't have a lot in the toolbox that is not foliar applications. So you'd really be stuck covering that koi pond. But if you were talking about a scale issue, that may be an opportunity for you to apply a trunk injection or
Mhm.
something, if it was possible to do a bark spray or a soil application into the mix there, just so you weren't quite as concerned about
Right,
about
right.
the fish issue.
Right. And kind of piggybacking off what you were saying is that like 90% of the time now, when we first began the IPM program, we were doing a lot of bark sprays and different stuff like that. But nowadays, I try to go straight into injections. I just like them better. I don't really like the sight of spraying chemicals and out in the wide open. And I think that it's more controlled and targeted when I'm putting it right into the soil versus out in the atmosphere. That's just my personal opinion. But and it seems to me like the trunk and the soil injections are quicker too. They're a
It
lot quicker.
depends. Yeah, and it depends on the product that you're using too, right? So like Transtech obviously goes up way quicker than a metocloprid,
Right.
Zytec. So yeah, no, but I think that is a really good point. I know that we as an industry are moving a little bit more towards tree injection or soil injection over, or even bark spray over foliar spray, just because it is more targeted. But of course, like there's certain situations for everything, and I think that we just need to be really mindful practitioners when it comes to that. I'm going to jump to these questions. So, Jason, this is a good one. Um, I do not have specific questions regarding Transtech, but discussion on pricing bark sprays would be helpful. Thanks. So, David, if you want to answer that, and then I can give it my
Yeah.
perspective.
So for bark sprays is the same thing that you're going to need for like what I was talking about with DBHs. You're going to need to know the total DBH that you're going to be spraying. So, and DBH, of course, all y'all know that is diameter at breast height. So if you've got 30 trees that you're going to do bark sprays on here that are averaging from 6 to 9 inches in DBH, then what I do is I pick the middle number, and then I just count the trees and then times it by that. And then that's your total DBH, and then you'll be able to from there. Your Rainbow Tech they're really great about helping with pricing or showing you how to price that correctly, as long as you have the account of the trees and the total DBH. You can pick the phone up and call them, and they're going to tell you, hey, this is what this is how much this should cost, or they can have that conversation with you.
This is a great plug for Rainbow Tech Sport. I appreciate that. That's not the purpose of this presentation, but I do appreciate that. And then what I will add to, Jason, it depends what kind of property you're on. So for sure, with your landscape, big contracts, when you've got tons and tons of trees, just counting the trees, adding up average DBH inches, you'll get pretty darn close to what you're going to need for chemicals. For smaller properties, if you've only got a few trees, you can measure all of them and actually do the specific math. And like David just said, we actually have some calculators for this. So we would basically calculate exactly how much product you need, do the math and figure out how much of that specific product you would need and what the cost would be to you. And then you can do your own markups. We can plug in what percentage markup you prefer. You can add in what your labor would cost and then get you a final price. And then what I will say too is, for me, when I was pricing Transtech bark sprays, I would just kind of over time figure out what the per inch cost would be and just slap that number right on it. So for me, and this was a few years ago, so things have changed a little bit. I was in the Chicago market at the time, so again, market prices are different. But I was slapping anywhere from, like, I don't know, $6 to $10 a DBH inch for like a residential property. And that would, we did the math and that covered it. So again, like, find your threshold, find your math, and call us if you want to actually sit down and do the specific math on it. For like a municipal bid, when you're trying to get it as low as possible, that's actually really important. So knowing the exact number of inches in those circumstances may be useful versus, like David was saying, like a bigger contract where you're like, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Jesse, is Acefate still a viable insecticide for certain scales, such as injection with M3? Okay, so I don't know what M3 is, but yes, Acefate is still a viable insecticide for certain scales. So we have Lepitect, that is our soil applied Acefate. That works relatively well for scale pests with shorter life cycles, or you have to do 2 applications, because the issue with Acefate is that it really only has a residual of about 30 days, and typically a scale life cycle is longer than 30 days. So if you sat with us last week or 2 weeks ago when we had scale days, we had a lot of different presenters talk about this. I think the fellow from Colorado talked about this quite a bit. They still recommend Acefate out there for some of their pests, but again, shorter residual, so maybe not as good of an option depending on your client. That being said, that is one of our more pollinator friendly options. And then, thank you, my team is saying M3 is an old RTSA single refillable tree injecting device. We do not have it. We have our IQ suite, so that's our Q Connect, things like that. Our Acefate, though, is soil applied, so that would be done using a soil injection. And then there is also Lepitect infusible, which can go through our Q Connect system. So Jesse, let me know if you have more questions on that. And then I'm going to answer Catherine's. A little unrelated, does Lepitect used as a soil injection present the same issues with birds as a foliar application? A client brought it up last season and I didn't know. Okay, so this is a good question. I don't know what the foliar implications for birds are. So Catherine, I will have to get back to you on that unless I have a team member who knows the answer to it. But Catherine, I'm going to take a message on this. Okay, Laura has a good question, and this is for you, David. Any advice on moving into commercial market for plant healthcare for a smaller arborist company? So this is exactly what you do, David, right? I am the plant healthcare department as an individual currently. Is scale one of your main pests for commercial clients?
Yeah, it could. Yes, it's probably the main pest. But I also do other stuff like root injection, deep root fertilizations. Because parking lot trees and stuff like that on commercial landscape are under very high stress. We do a lot of deep root fertilization on regular, spring and fall, and we also do a lot of treatments with scales. I still do some Dutch elm disease treatments, And I use a lot of with commercial landscaping. I use a lot of plant TGRs, tree growth regulators, like Cambistat, or is a great product for a tree that's planted in an area where it's going to outgrow it. So, you know, we can maintain that tree where so it won't outgrow its space. Going from, you know, from commercial to, I mean, from residential to commercial, it's just basically about more than anything is being able to penetrate that market, and having accessibility to the properties. But yeah, scale is one of the main things that we deal with. But there's bunches of other, you know, plant healthcare stuff that we do now. So, you know, you can start off with scale management programs. That's kind of how I started off with, is just with regular scale management programs. And then as I learned, because I'm pretty much a self-taught arborist, and then, you know, I just ventured out to other stuff, you know, and figured it out basically what works and what sells to the clients. Commercial clients are, you know, usually via email. You're not going to never really see them face to face. So the presentation of your proposal is very important, trying to explain why is this important to do this for this tree? You know, why is this? Why is that? You know, you should be able to answer all the whys and, you know what their pain is on the property. Like, you know, if you walk up on a property and you see, you know, a bunch of, let's say some lace bark elms and they're all chlorotic, then you know that, you know, first we want to check the, you know, a lot of people start from the top of the tree. I usually start from the bottom of the tree. So because, you know, it might have too much mulch piled up around it, and it needs you can do a hand root collar excavation and cut them advantageous roots off, remove some of the mulch, you know, or propose a demulching. It's, you know, there's a plethora of things to do on commercial properties. It's just having the access to them is, would be the main, I believe the main driver is getting the access to them property management groups.
Yeah, if I can jump in too, Laura, David, I think that's great. You know, I was with a large plant health, like a large tree care company, so I don't have quite the experience with this. But what I will say is, now that I work with a ton of landscape companies, most of my landscape companies are always looking for good subcontractors for plant healthcare.
Yeah.
So that may be a great way for you to get your foot in the door on some of those commercial properties. Then you can start building your relationships with those property managers, and then also with those landscape companies. And I think that I don't know, I personally think that might be a great way to nudge your way in that way if you're really looking for more commercial work. Cool. Thanks, David.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then John. Okay, this is a good one. So John wants to know, are your charts based on phenology or just general trends? What about when you work in the area that is between two different hardiness zones? Okay, so John, this is actually great. You get into like the full-fledged nerdiness. And John, I know you were with us a couple weeks ago because I recognize your name from the webinars. But they're both phenology and growing degree day focus. So growing degree days, we usually use a base of 50. There's a little formula that you can use, but basically growing degree days along with phenology will give you pretty good indications of where you are at with emergence of certain pests, especially with like our scales, which we are certainly trying to time with crawler emergence. So both, but then the second question, when you work in an area that's between two different zones, part of this is kind of like trial and error and knowing where you live. So David, I know you cover a pretty large geographic area, and I used to, like I said, I used to be in Chicago. So Chicago, obviously right on the lake.
Right.
The west side would get warm very quickly. The east side was always really cold. So we would time our stuff west to east. Always, because we knew that crab apples would start to pop on the southwest side almost a month before they would start to pop right on the lake. So part of it is going to be just kind of like learning your territory and learning how that works. There's no way to be perfectly timed on every single property. But the nice thing is there's a pretty big window
Mhm.
for a lot of these insects, because most of them, just because emergence says growing degree day 300 doesn't mean the population is bursting at 300. It can be bursting for, a period of time. So if you can, hit that stage during that period, you'll get reasonable control. And then this is also why we talk about residual with pesticides a lot too, because if you are choosing to use a pesticide, choosing the one that is going to have the residual that actually meets your needs does come into play. So like we love Proxite, we love that it's an insect growth regulator, but it does only have a 30-day residual. It's soft on beneficials, it's really much better for the environment. You're not worried about bees, blah, blah, blah. However, like if it is on a property that absolutely has no tolerance for the pests at all, and they need longer than that, a residual longer than that you wouldn't be able to get back, then you actually have to kind of look at using your toolbox, look at using a systemic on top of that. So you could 1-2 punch and manage it accordingly. So there's a lot of considerations for sure.
Yeah, and if I can just piggyback on that is that like in my area, so I cover from the Sova market goes from Richmond all the way down to Virginia Beach, which Virginia Beach is 2 hours away. So, even me getting in the truck and driving from here to Virginia Beach, it's the degrees down there, the temperature, everything is different. So, like Allison was saying is that, you have to know your territories, and then, the longer that you're monitoring the pest activity or the insect activity, you'll get to know exactly the timing. You get the timing down. Sometimes it's a little, it's you sometimes it's an educated guess, like, that this is when it's going to emerge.
Perfect. Yes. Okay. So then I have just one more, and we are like getting up pretty. Oh, okay. This is good. For a small operator, what methods might be simplest to develop a solid process as your business scales? Haha, pun intended. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, simplest methods to develop a solid process. Yeah, David, I think this is a good one for you. So, explain maybe a little bit on how your process worked to grow
To
things.
scale it.
Well, just
To-
like, I don't know, even if you want to, because you started a tree care side of a landscape company that had no tree care, right? You guys were subbing everything out.
right. So
Cool.
basically 4 years ago, we were, yeah, we were 100%, we were subbing everything out. And then now 4 years later, we have our own tree care service that's growing, and the plant healthcare is growing. So, the way that I scaled it was, is just putting paper out on the streets, putting proposals and stuff that I IB'd, and just pumping as many proposals and, quality proposals out. That if anything else I can say is that I've learned over the last 4 years being in the commercial industry is that, if you type up a 700 word email to a client, to a property manager, most likely she's not or he is not going to read it. So you need to get to your bullet points quick, or on your proposal, make it quick, short, and into the point, direct. Um, and then actually being active on the properties. And like I said, the more proposals that you put out, the more that you're going to see come back. And that's basically how I scaled it. I went from, proposal activities, let's say maybe like 10 a week to 50 a week. And then you'll see your bill. If you have that ability to put them size proposals out, and then, just starting conversations with different clients. And I've gotten a lot of business by just word of mouth. It's like doing a good job on one property, and the lady says, "Hey, well, I have a property down in Virginia Beach," and I'm like, "Well, hey, we have a crew down there. Let me help you out." So that's
Sure.
how we've scaled it.
David, did you then start with like a specific few services that you offered and then start to grow those from there as you learned a little bit more? Or how did you do that?
So To be quite honest with you, I've always wanted to get into plant healthcare, but like I said, I was a climbing arborist for forever. And, either I pruned trees or took them down. Most of the time I was working for a crane company taking trees down. So, when I came to where I currently work with Brightview, I was open up to a big, vast amount of clients, and it was kind of overwhelming at first. But what my point being is that is that I just had more. So at first, is what I did is I concentrated on the easier stuff for me, which was scale. It was easy to identify, and plus the customers they can see that, they can see immediate results. With plant healthcare, a lot of times there's not immediate results. It takes a little bit of time. With scale treatments, you can get pretty good if you hit the emergent times right. You can get really good control, and then the people's cars, like if you got Crepe Myrtle bark scale, it'll stop covering their vehicles or their houses and attracting ants and all this other stuff. So that's basically how we did it. And it was a team effort. It wasn't just me. It was a lot of different people from the branch in Richmond all the way down to Virginia Beach. Virginia Beach for me is like my hot zone. I love going down there because it's so many bugs. There's like bugs everywhere. Not saying it's just a lot of activities because it's close to the ocean.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Cool. John says, come on, David, we know it was all you. Sounds like
Thanks,
it.
John.
But then